Hello and welcome to our third episode of the Tell Not Show. We're so happy to have you back. This is Hirsha Fox. She is the author of newly released Son of Deception, Homeschooling Mom to Four, and Gamer. Yeah, Son of Deception, beautiful cover.
Thank you. And this is Julia J.K. Allen, editor, author, and author coach extraordinaire. Julia loves many things, including dogs, pigs, stars, butterflies, and books. Most of all, she loves her job editing and her dog tour, Layla. Thank you for joining us today.
Yes, thank you for joining us today. I believe we can welcome on our guest. So let's add her to the stream. Hello.
Hi.
Hello. It's good to finally meet you.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, we are all on the same Discord, which is fun, and how we all kind of met each other. And I actually got to meet Catherine in person because we're both from Michigan. Yay! Yeah, she is the nicest and the best person to have a picnic with.
Thank you. I try.
Yeah. So we're super excited today to welcome Katharine M. Sweet, who is a Michigan girl born and raised. You can catch her on a summer weekend going up north to the lake, and she's a typical fall-loving girl. Please give her cool nights, falling leaves, hoodies, and hot caramel apple cider. She's powered by caffeine, hockey, nerd culture, giving gifts to loved ones, and just a splash of spite, which I love. She loves to read and write since she was a child, which stems from a little escapism and a lot of listening to her characters talking in her head. Admittedly, she's always been a fan of horror and suspense, and reading in that genre gave her an affinity for complex characters and complicated storylines. So that sharpened her wit and taught her how to write in a way that draws you into the world she's created. Welcome, Catherine.
Hi.
Hello. It's so good to have you. So, yeah, I know your bio talks a little bit about the horror genre, but you actually have written a book recently, two books recently,
Yes.
that are not quite horror. So, why don't
They're
you tell us a
definitely
little
not.
bit about that?
So I wrote in fan fiction for years, and I was part of a fan Discord, and we have been this really like little core group of people. We've been around for about about 10 years or so. So we've been together forever, and we've been trying to challenge. We've been trying to challenge ourselves, like more complicated storylines, and like how can we make our characters better. And so we had what we called a roulette challenge, where we took the characters from one show and the concept from another, and then we would pick up the and then someone would anonymously pick what genre we were writing in. So I got horror characters, I got the Jane the Virgin-ish storyline, and then I got rom-com, which I don't typically write. So I was horrified. I was like,
Yeah.
no, I can't do that. And I was about 2 chapters in, and I was like, guys, I think this is my first book.
Right.
So I took it, I kept writing it, I finished it, and then I deconstructed it, tore it apart, ripped everything out of it, and made it my own. And that was my first book that I published September 28th. 2021, and then I wrote the second of the duet and published that this year of same date. I issued them out on the same day because I'm manic like that.
Mhm.
So and that one came out September 28th, 2022. And the little twist in the second book is that the brother that you meet in the first book wrote the first book. And that's kind of the twist to those two, connecting those.
Yeah. And the first book is called
it's called Love Is. It is a twist on the accidental pregnancy trope. Looks like this. It's super cute. We'll put it back on my.
You might put it in front of your face. Yeah. The background's blurry. Yeah.
Sideways.
There we go.
Perfect.
Love is.
Yes, it's a twist on the accidental pregnancy trope. Matt sleeps with his ex-wife, who is a nurse at a fertility clinic. She gets mad at him, decides to inseminate herself, but she does not. Cass is there. The order gets mixed up, so Cass ends up pregnant with Matt's child before he even meets her. He's overwhelmed. He hates everything. Fair. This, and then the second book is Love Stories Are, which is this one. Where Where are we at?
I have
Come
to
on.
angle it again. Yeah.
Da, 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 da. Oh,
Oh, we got
Almost
it for
had
a
it.
second.
we're just
Yeah.
gonna play with it until I'm gonna sit here and Vanna White it until
There,
Vanna White. There we go. Love stories are.
getting
Love
closer to
Stories
the
are is
camera.
the second one. This is a twist on the billionaire trope.
Okay.
Fake dating. Anna is our billionaire. She is a little bit more lonely than she would probably like to admit. And she works for a publishing house, and she finds Vinny's submission in the trash can because he wrote his brother's love story out and submitted
Mhm.
it without, any of the things you're supposed to do when you're querying. He just sent it.
Right.
And
Right.
she's like, oh, what is this? And so she's mad because they should have shredded it and they didn't.
Mhm.
But she starts reading it and she's like, oh, I kind of want this. And so she contacts him and he doesn't want anybody to know he wrote it. So we end up in the fake dating scenario.
And shenanigans ensue.
And shenanigans ensue.
Love it.
I'm
Yeah.
very proud of the second one.
You sound very cute.
I'm just glad that I'm not the only author in the world that wrote a book because of a dare. Because like actually this book I wrote with my sister, we co-wrote together, is The Sight of Shadows, was written on a dare as well because my writing group I like had writer's block so bad, was struggling to write anything, and they were like, what genre can you not write? And I was like, horror. And they were like, write a horror story. And so that's the beginning of this short story compilation. So I'm just like relieved I'm not the only one.
We're not. We're not.
Yeah. So I really love your story, obviously, because it's so similar to mine for this book. But what got you into writing in the first place? You said to start out with fan fiction, but tell us a little bit about your writing journey.
Yeah, so I have a large German and Irish family, so storytelling is like part of like every event, and it is always loud. And obviously, I talk with my hands. That is something that I grew up watching, and all the noise and the adults talking and like that. So that became a thing for me. It's like I loved listening to stories be told and how they were told and like all that stuff. And so as I got older, I would write my own stories. I would kind of write them to myself in little notebooks. And then the internet started. And I'm old enough to like remember when it was just beginning, when you had to do the dial-up thing and all of that.
Right.
But I started writing on fan sites, like back in the day when you had to like email the person who owned the site and like, hey, here's the next chapter for my piece. And like,
wow, yeah.
Like way back in the day. So like I started writing like fan fiction just because I was a fix-it person. So if I didn't like the way the story went, I'm like, oh, I can write that better. I can write that better. So I started in that, and then when fanfiction.net started taking off, I started writing in there, and then AO3, and I've always loved exploring the ins and outs of complex characters that I fell in love with through media. So
yeah, a lot of people share that journey, and I'm so glad for like the internet that it came about when it did, and like we saw this bloom of being able to share each other's stories and read other stories.
For sure.
Yeah, no, it was wonderful. The only horrible thing was the sound that the internet used to make.
Yes. Yeah. You're like trying to log on at night when nobody's awake, and you're like,
and then the screeching, and just I'm just like, who thought that was a good idea to like put that sound to hearing the internet every time?
It was a parental lock. It was like an early parental lock.
Right. And it was so funny too because like you'd get kicked off if anyone needed the phone, so like that sound would just be like multiple times a day, just like yeah. I love it. What is your writing process like? Like, are you a pantser, a plotter, a little bit of both?
I'm definitely a knitter, both. I'm run right in between. So I always write my ending first, and the ending does often change. But I have to write to something. And a friend of mine who also reads horror and contemporary says that my process sounds like a horror book, because like in a horror book, you're trying to get to the end with the final girl or the final character.
Right.
You're trying to. And when I write, that's how I write. Whatever my ending is my final girl. So everything that I'm writing into that story is trying to get us to that final scene, that goalpost in mind. But don't plot out everything specifically. Like I have certain
Right.
points I want to hit because there are conversations that I'll have heard in my head that I know I want to work in. And other than that, I just sort of like go with the flow, see where it takes me.
Mm-hmm.
Love is the original conflict got thrown out because as I'm writing along, Matt's like did a very sharp left, and I was like, "Sir, we were going right. You have,
Right.
you have changed the conflict now. I have to write in a whole new thing." And he's just like flips me off on the way by for putting him into this book and keeps going left. And I'm like, all right, okay, fair enough.
Yes.
Fair enough. Yes. Yes. So you would say that you're one of those characters or writers that like the characters decide and you just kind of follow along.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
I know where we're going towards the end. Like, obviously, I'm writing in contemporary romance, so I'm writing towards happily ever after. That's where we're going. So this is the approximate framework of how we're going to get to happily ever after. This is the ending scene. How I'm going to get there. The characters just sort of like take me along for the ride.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Wonderful. No.
We plot, but we do it knowing full well our characters are going to do whatever they want.
Right.
Hijack.
Right.
Here we go.
Yeah. No, I love it.
So tell us a little bit about your journey as an author. What were some of the challenges that you faced when you were first starting out?
Yeah, so I knew that if I wanted to publish the book in the format that I had written it and the way I wrote it, I was going to have to go indie. No publisher was going to take it in the form it is. The first book is 350 pages. It's 140,000 words for contemporary romance. That is not going to happen. They're going to want me. I do, without it being a spoiler, there is one chapter that is outside the normal two voices that you've been following along with the whole book. And it's very significant. It's very poignant, but I knew any traditional publisher was not going to let me do that. So I knew I was going to have to go indie from the beginning. And I like to phrase it like this. I never know what I don't know until I hit the wall. And that was my entire writing process because I was the stereotypical gifted child. Things just came naturally to me. And as I had to start like studying things and learning and like, I was like, oh, I have to learn things. Oh no, I don't know if I know how to learn things. I just know them. So I thought editing was going to be the worst challenge. And I think some of the hardest things that I found is marketing's really my biggest challenge. It is hard to balance everything. And so you're going between working on your current whip and whatever you're writing, and you're trying to edit the one that you've got in the editing stage, and you're trying to market, and you're trying to keep your newsletter up, and you're trying to, and it's just that constant, I think, has been the biggest challenge for me, is to try to figure out how to balance everything with having a full-time job and, you know, and needing to sleep at some point, just a nap or two.
And eat. Yeah. Right. And have a personal life and all of that stuff. It can be very difficult.
I'm married. I don't have to worry about personal life. He's stuck with me.
Oh yeah. Which is a good thing. It's very hard to balance everything because it's like, you know, when people say like, oh, I'd love to write a novel, they don't often think about the business side of authoring and everything that entails. It's not just the writing, which is hard enough, right? The writing is hard enough, but then you add everything else on top of it, and then it's like suddenly, and then like also we're like, oh my gosh, I haven't read in like 2 years. I want to read a book, right? So, do I read or do I write? That's kind of like the big dilemma.
Do I read? Do I write? Do I sleep? Yeah.
Do I market? Yeah. So many balls in the air that we're trying to juggle as writers. And I think that, like, I think it is a learning curve in the first couple of years where, like, just like finding out your writing process, you have to find out like your process of being a writer and balancing all of those things.
Yes.
So what advice would you give young Katharine as she's just starting out this journey? This writing journey of I'm going to publish something now.
Be more flexible with yourself. If you set a deadline, allow yourself to break said deadline, and give yourself more time than you think you need. Like if you think you need 20 days to like get it from like the editor to like ready, give yourself 40. Like double what you think you need, because with the second book, I had a huge disaster with my editor. They actually fell through. Um,
Yeah.
and so I was supposed to get back the copy back on September 1st. And I didn't hear from them till September 4th. And I needed to have it up to Amazon on the 24th. And I had a literal panic attack. I was another server I'm a part of. I was up with them sobbing till like 3 in the morning because I did not know what I was going to do. And
Right.
two of the girls actually worked with me for 2 weeks. And had Julia offer to help me too, but they were helping me, and we were up till like 3 in the morning for like 3 or 4 days straight, just like hacking through and
Just
editing and just
pouring through.
doing all the things. And
Wow.
like it was like the best nightmare, I think, is how I described it, because like it was the worst case scenario, but it had the best outcome. So to a younger writer or to a younger Catherine, I would say, take your time, spend more time on planning. Don't
Right.
be so rigid with yourself. I have to hit this deadline. Give
Right.
yourself some grace. It's okay.
Right. Giving yourself grace
Excellent.
is
Thank
important
you.
in every aspect of your life, but I think we're always so hard on ourselves. Like, so if we treat yourself like you would your friend, right? It's kind of the advice that's good to give to
Yes.
people is, yeah, give yourself
Say this to
grace.
would you say this to another writer? If you wouldn't, you might want to.
Right. Right. Yeah. Don't say it to yourself if you wouldn't say it to another writer. I know we like to ask everyone who comes on the show what they think that their strengths as a writer are. And I love your answer. You said it was dialogue and characterization.
Is
Um, so when it comes to characterization, let's talk about that first. Like, what do you think it requires to do characterization well?
So I think you have to figure out who your characters are.
Hmm.
One of the crazier things in my writing process is I do everything on spreadsheets. I'm weird. It is probably one of my only Virgo traits. Is I make a spreadsheet, and each tab is like a different character. And one of the first things I sit with, because usually I get a scene first in my head, and then I sort of like make a circle around that, make bigger circles until I figure out what the meat of it is. I try to think, how would my character react to a car crash? So if they are driving along and they come up to a car that is on fire, how are they going to react? Are they going to jump out of their car? Are they immediately going to try to pull the person out of the car? Sail on by? Are
Hmm.
they getting out, getting the fire extinguisher, putting the fire out, and then trying to help the person? Are they calling 911? Do they not call 911?
Right.
I try to think of them in a very intense situation to kind of test their mettle. I sit with that for a minute, and then I start building their character around that. And
I
that's,
love that so much.
thank you. I'm going to scare the crap out of them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's very telling how people are going to react in an emergency situation.
Yes.
So that's like the perfect example of figuring out
Yes.
what do you do under stress and how do
Yes.
and what do you do? Yeah, in that situation. Um, if you were to explain characterization
Mhm.
to like a layperson, what would you
Mhm.
say that characterization is?
I think characterization is so, like, when you're watching a TV show and,
Hmm.
the show's going along and you've gotten used to the characters, you've seen them for, a handful of episodes, and then all of a sudden they go left
Right.
and there's no explanation. You know how that feels weird to you? How that feels off putting as, like, somebody watching it?
Mhm.
That's what
Yeah.
characterization is, because if
Okay.
you've got a character going left and the show that you're watching, the movie that you're watching, doesn't explain that, it's just, oh, they're quirky, oh, they did that. That's an example of where you see characterization even though you might not understand what it is to create characterization. It's
Right.
that what is the through line of that character? Is their through line, I am seeking the truth in all things. In all things I'm seeking the truth. So, like, think
Hmm.
of like X-Files with like Fox Mulder. In all things he is seeking the truth.
Mm.
Everything he does is informed. Even his dumb decisions are formed by, I'm going to seek the truth, I am going to find the thing.
Mhm.
And I think that is really the core of what characterization is it's finding the core of who that character is, and then building memorable quirks around that personality, around that central line.
Yeah, I love that the focus on quirks too, because a lot of times like we do like build up our characters, but we don't give them like the little quirks that make them a human.
Yes. I think with the second book, I really showed a lot of improvement there. So I got really bad writer's block when I was working on the second book.
Mhm.
It
Yeah.
would not go anywhere, and it would not go. And I was like, I have a deadline, first of all.
Right.
Again, I have a deadline, and I figured out finally it was that I had Anna's character wrong. I
Mhm.
wrote her as this demure, soft, quiet, and then I realized she is on an executive board at a publishing company. And she got that position very young. There is no way in all of God's green creation that she is shy or withdrawn or demure.
Mm.
She's
Mhm.
not loud. And I wouldn't describe her in the like, because I wanted to do a character that wasn't cold, but at the same
Right.
time was assertive. So when I wrote her demure, she wasn't going anywhere. And the second I sort of let her be straightforward, like the very first scene of the second book is she's on a blind date. She's on a terrible blind date. And he compliments her watch, thinking that, well, pink's a pretty color for a girl when they shook hands. And her thought
Mm.
process is, I looked you up on LinkedIn. This watch is worth a third of your yearly salary. Like,
Right.
there is
Right.
no, like, there is no, oh, okay. No,
What a
absolutely not.
cute little watch.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one of the things about her, and Anna's a great example of quirks, of writing quirks
Mhm.
into a character. So she can't eat red meat. And I can't remember the syndrome name off the top of my head because that's on my spreadsheet. But basically, if you get bit by a tick, you can't
Yeah.
process red meat. And so
Mhm.
that happened to her as a child. It's not something she remembers or dwells on, but she doesn't eat red meat. And she's colorblind, partially. She's partially colorblind, so she has trouble with shades. So she is constantly wearing monochromatic things. She
Mm.
is very picky about like how things are when she sets them down. She uses different shaped tabs in like manuscripts she's going over so she doesn't
Cool.
mix them up. And then I think the other thing is she's taught herself to calm down and
Right.
self-soothe herself, which is a woman in a powerful position, she
Mm.
can't fly off the handle and be super emotional. So when something makes her angry, I do it a couple of times where she takes this long, drawn out deep breath while she's counting
Mhm.
Uh-huh.
to
Mhm.
like calm herself back down. She'll let her shoulders drop as she's like sighing. And it's something Vinny picks up that he realizes that's what she's doing. She's making herself be calm,
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
which was
I
really fun.
love those little details because,
Yeah.
like I said, it rounds out a character and makes them feel like a person for
Yes.
sure. Um,
Makes them stand out for sure.
Yes.
yeah, yeah. So talking about writer's block, I think we can jump ahead. We like to ask the question of like, how did you break your writer's block? So for you, you said that it was realizing that your characterization was off, right? What do you do in other situations like where you're stuck?
So I will pace like a crazy person around my
Hmm.
house. I am
Movement is
loud.
great for writer's
It
block.
is.
Yeah,
I like,
Physical
true.
movement.
yes, I will move around. I will yell. I will talk things out. I will try to
Mhm.
take the story in a completely different direction than I'm planning on. Um, I have one right. I'm working on the current whip that I'm working on is sort of like a crime-ish kind of thing going on.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
so I got stuck in a scene. So I started thinking about what if vampires suddenly showed up, like something like a totally off the wall, like bonkers,
Mhm.
that wouldn't
Mm,
happen, just to kind of like get back into the characters of things. And
right.
the other thing I do is I free write. I will just sit there and I will just write out in the most just descriptions of what's going on, of not the story, not the plot, not anything, just what does the hotel room look like? What does her dresses look like? What does the costumes look like? And going through like, or just describing my day in like
Mhm.
very vivid, boring detail, to make
Mm.
myself want to go back to my story versus writing about my own boring life.
Right, right.
I love that how you get yourself into the frame of mind. You put yourself into that world, into those characters. Like that's wonderful.
Yes.
Good advice.
Yeah,
Okay.
especially because like I noticed for a lot of people they don't necessarily like focus on the description, so it's really interesting to like use that as a method to like
Yes.
break through your
Mhm.
block is to focus on descriptions and like
Yes.
what's going on around, because a lot of times we have kind of talking in a void. I call it, which yeah, I know I'm guilty of it too as an author. I do that all the time. I'm just like walls of dialogue, walls of speech, right? So what are tips you have for dialogue?
So I tend to I know how the characters talk. So one of the weird, again, one of my weird Virgo things is I have a list of words my characters will say and won't say.
Okay.
So in the first book, Casera is a pastor's daughter. She was raised in like rural Texas. She doesn't swear a lot. She's not appalled by it. It doesn't throw her off. It's just not
Mm-hmm.
part of her normal vocabulary. So what that does is, when she does swear, it like catches everybody off guard, including the reader. Like, oh my goodness, like.
Right,
But
right.
it's also like my goal when I'm writing dialogue is that you know who that character is, oftentimes without the tag. Like if I'm using the tag to like show you what's going on. In the first book, Matt, the oldest brother, he is explosive and dramatic. He is loud. Everything is why me kind of like nonsense going on. He is a ball of stress. And he is very to the point. He is very blue collar, where Vinny lives in his head. So there's a lot more poetic language that he uses. There is a lot more technical things, but he is also more inward. He is definitely neurodivergent. It definitely comes across in the writing of the book. And so he doesn't phrase things the same way. And then you look at regional things. They're from Texas. If you look and listen to a Texas accent, they cut the G's off a lot with ing words. So while I didn't do it every time I wrote something in, there are a lot of dialogue tags where if I thought like they wouldn't say that, trying is like I would cut the G off because they wouldn't be saying it. So it's finding those little vocal quirks, and then I do some repetition throughout my book, like stuff that like is a touch point where the reader sees it and go, oh, I remember that. They say that a lot. Yes, they do. And there's a point. I'm trying to anchor you back down. Look at the thing.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you think that it is effective to do things like spell things out phonetically, or do you think that that can be too heavy handed?
So for my first run through, on your first draft, just do whatever feels natural. Like write the thing out. And then I think in editing, you figure out which ones you need to keep and which ones you need to toss. So I have a child in the second book.
Yeah.
They range between like 2.5 to 4-ish throughout the book. Well, no, 3 to 4. Like they're getting up there. Their verbiage isn't going to be perfect.
Right.
So it's deciding when I want to confuse you with what the child is saying and when I want you to be able to infer. Like we used play instead of using the L, we use the W. That's a very common one.
Right.
Kids, but you still understood in context what they were trying to do. But I think if you do it too much, it becomes distracting. So it was finding that sort of balance between having a little bit of that babble talk and then also limiting it so it wasn't overwhelming or confusing or stressful for the reader.
Right. Yeah, because we don't. I think like anything, right? Too much spice ruins the dish, right? So, my big pet peeve is when somebody puts ellipses in like for every other word.
Not every other word.
Well, no, or maybe they like a heavy-handed use of like ellipses or to indicate, which happens in normal speech.
Well,
we have pauses, we have shy people, but
it's stressful when you're listening to someone actually do it. When you're reading it, it is just as stressful. So you have to be really careful that you're applying just enough stress to their reader that they're getting the gist of it, but not so much that they just like rage quit the book.
Oh, for sure.
Yes, I will rage quit a book like that. The thing is, like, I feel like with ticks like that, you can always say it in the exposition that
Mhm.
she stumbles over her words a lot, or she's
Mhm.
shy and has a hard time speaking up for herself. You don't have to put 20 ellipses in one
Oh, for
paragraph
sure.
of dialogue. Yeah. That's my advice as an editor. I'm just
All of
throwing
it.
that in there. Yeah. Yeah, because that can, like Kirsha was saying, it gets stressful. Like, I'm the type of person that like wants to finish other people's sentences for them if
Mhm.
they're speaking too slowly. So I'm definitely not going to read all of the ellipses
Yeah,
um without pitching a fit, right?
for
So
sure.
um
Listen, I will
yeah.
say that I'm glad I have people that help me edit because I definitely
Yeah.
tend to use them heavy when I write. When on my first run through, I have a lot.
Mhm.
And so I had a lot of suggestions like, hey, instead of having those ellipses, you can break up that sentence, have her fidget with her hands, have her
Right.
have him like adjust his
Yeah.
Mhm.
coffee cup. It'll still give you the pause. It'll give you that like moment where like you can tell they're struggling without always doing the ellipses. Save that for like when you're at a super emotional scene when the characters like
Mm-hmm.
can't speak because they're so torn up or they're so choked up or something bad's
Right.
happening.
I love that advice to like sprinkle in what they're doing, and instead of just having it indicated by the punctuation, because
Mhm.
like a lot of times we're talking with our hands, or we do pause and fidget with
Mhm.
things, and that's as much as a nervous tell as an ellipsis is. I think it's actually stronger as well. Um, what are your big influences in writing?
So I am a theater person. I
Yeah.
studied theater in college. So that is the lines of a theater show, of a play, they move the plot forward. So
Mhm.
I remember being fascinated by like how you use the vocal cues and the music cues in theater. So anything that is like dramatic or like you have a character who's got like a really strong personality, like those are the things that inspire me. So like again, X-Files is a good example. You have two diametrically opposed people, so
Mhm.
watching that like intense like conflict that runs through something really always inspired me. And like again, that's one of the reasons I like horror and I like suspense. And and don't get me wrong, like I read rom-coms. I'm reading more contemporary romance. I'm trying to get closer to my
Hmm.
niche. But I'm always inspired by a character that like them without seeing them. Like if you tell me a quote or like you see those like the memes with like the incorrect quotes from the characters, like you'll
Oh,
see
okay.
one and be like, "Oh, I know who that is.
Mhm.
I
Hmm.
know that's Bucky from the Marvel movies. I know that." So I think that my big inspirations are like either plays or shows or anything that sort of like makes you think. So like
Right.
anything that's going to inspire you to like, I want to know more about ABCD, or I really liked this dramatic thing that happened, or what does that really say about the community that the writer was in? like
Hmm.
like what group are they a part of that's how they felt they had to tell their story out. So those are kind of the big things that inspire me.
Wow.
Sorry.
It's okay. I
No,
love
it's a
your
wonderful
answers so
answer.
much. You speak, and then both of us are just speechless. Like, wow, that is like
I'm old. I have a lot of practice.
great.
I think we're all around the same age, so you're just making us look bad. No,
No.
no. I'm just teasing. Going back to what you said earlier about like characterization, a lot of times we don't know when we get it right, but we know when we get it wrong because we
Uh-huh.
kind of have that like Mandala effect, like alternate universe where like Berenstain Bears was spelled, I swear, with EI,
Right.
right? So like we have this kind of jarring effect of this is not the reality I know because
Oh,
the character is acting out of character.
yes.
Um, what are your tips to kind of avoid those situations, right? When it's glaring to the reader, but maybe not so obvious to the author.
Right. I think having feedback is always important. I used an alpha reader on my second book, which is one of the reasons I think it's a lot stronger. So while I was
Okay.
still working on the plot, while I was still writing, I sent it to an alpha reader. She's a friend of mine, and she said, "Hey, you know how you referenced the Chicago trip?" I was like, "Well, yeah." And she's like, "You need to take them there. You need to take them to Chicago and you need to put them in that space." And I'm like, "I don't want to do that. That's going to be a lot more words." And she goes, "You need to take them to Chicago." And when I gave it to my second alpha reader after I put those scenes in, her literal first quote was, "It was so good, but when it hit Chicago, it just took off." And I was like, "Oh." so,
Right.
so getting feedback, I think, is the most important thing. And especially if like maybe something like, well, I know they're a little off, but like I need them to do this thing. So like I'm just gonna, it'll be fine. Those especially are the scenes that you want someone to look over. Like those are scenes that you want to make sure that you're like, hey, when you're doing the read through, pay attention to this scene. Because sometimes characters just do things and you're like, okay, I need you to do this for the plot. You also need to build in a reason. You need to build in stakes, and that's one thing I think that is there a stake with what's going on. There's something that happens in the second book without any spoilers. Anna's always been able to solve everything with money. That is her default setting.
Right.
She doesn't have to worry about it. So one of the things we had to do was we had to make money a not option to fix something.
Right.
Stakes for her, because suddenly she has all the money in the world and all the resources in the world, and none of them mean anything.
Right.
In the context when this thing happens. And I think you have to be able to explain that. So as I wrote it, that was one of the things that I tagged it for my alpha reader to look at. I was like, I need to make sure that this sounds in character for her. And she's like, yeah, absolutely. I will go at that and figure it out. And I think feedback, especially to make sure that characterization gets right, is one of the most important things. Find someone that will be mean, not attack you, but mean when they're going through to look for those things.
So you mentioned how you had your author friends help you edit your book last minute, and your reader groups, your alpha readers. It sounds like those have been like a really big help for you. Would you say that it's been like your biggest resource, your biggest help in your writing journey?
Yes. So I was having this conversation with somebody the other day about another separate issue, and I said out loud, before social media, I was very alone.
Right.
Because writing is kind of a solitary habit. It is something where we're often alone, we're doing it in our own space. And having a writer's Discord, having other people that I can talk to about the process with it, I can commiserate with it, also that have different life experiences than me or different writing strengths that I have. I tend to do empty room syndrome. I tend to write in a void. And one of the girls in one of the writing servers that I'm in, she would constantly call that out with scenes that I would show her. And she'd be like, I don't know where I am. I don't know where I am. I don't know where I am. You just gave me like, I just glitched. I can't tell why he's doing this thing that I feel like he should have already done. This doesn't make sense. This isn't how people move. And I would just be like, Argh! But at the same time, that is one of the strongest resources that I've had, is connecting with people that don't think the way I think and aren't in my environment, because the people who know me know me. And so they'll get an inside joke that I write because we get that joke. But if the joke falls flat to someone who doesn't have my life experience, I need to work on that. And I think that being a part of a writing community is really one of the biggest resources that I think, as a younger writer or even as a seasoned one, you need to work to build. And an authentic community that will call you out on your BS. Because that was one of the things that I have. One of the side characters in my second book, she's Black. And I told Jordan, who I work with, I said, I need you to be very critical on how I write her. And I was like, don't be nice to me or like give me the benefit of the doubt. And she looked at me and she goes, I would not. I'm your actual friend. I was like, thank you.
Right. Yeah.
Please call out those things, because I don't want to do something because I'm dumb and I don't know what I did. But if I did
absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I've read stories where they have like Asian characters, and they don't take their shoes off when they get in the door, and I'm just like, in what universe? Right? But
Yes.
it's like those little details that matter, which
Yes.
is why we hire people like
Yes.
sensitivity readers to make
Yes.
sure we're not doing any missteps.
Yes, I want to do that.
Yeah, because I'm like, in no Asian household would you ever just walk around in your house shoes, like,
That is,
or without your house shoes. You know what I mean? Like, you would not walk around in the house with your shoes on.
it's
like,
so funny because in the first book, it broke my cousin because so we end up with the forced proximity trope in the first book. Cass ends up moving in with Matt, Vinny, and his uncle. So there are 3 men in this college student who's having the baby, and they're all like, "Oh!" And when Matt walks into the house, he doesn't take his shoes off. So
right.
Cass follows suit because that's what happens. But she's like she clocks it.
Right, right.
At the end of the book, they're taking their shoes off before they come in the house.
Yeah.
Because she was like, no, boys, no.
Right.
Mhm.
I wear my shoes in the house sometimes because there's just metal shavings around randomly.
Yes, which is valid.
So like there can be reasons for wearing your shoes in the house, but like it's still like makes me like cringe on the inside, like my skin crawls where I'm like, I don't want. Yeah,
It doesn't feel right.
it does.
Sure.
It feels really,
Out of
really
your
wrong.
character.
Yeah.
My husband's family just wears them inside. I did not. So I split the difference. I bought rubber bottom slippers, and so like I'll toss my shoes off because my husband tracks snow through the house. Like he
You can't be going around barefoot.
Right. No, God, it's cold. I don't like it.
Yeah, that's another thing about Michigan is like the bare feet is like you can kind of pull it off in the summer, but like 7 months out of the year we're not warm enough.
It's too cold.
All right.
Awesome.
Yeah, I do want to ask about your favorite book or favorite author and why.
Okay, so I always have a favorite for the moment. I think one of my favorite legacy authors that like I've always loved is I love Dean Koontz, and I know he's an older writer. I know he did most of his writing in the 90s. Again, I'm older. I love his narrators, and that's one of the reasons that I really like his writing. I like the way the character that you're walking through the story with tells you the story. One of my current favorites is called Mexican Gothic. It is so good. I picked up another book that she wrote called The Daughter of Dr. Moreau. I am super geeked to read that one as well. I am fascinated by people who have lived different experiences than I have. How that shows through in their writing. So I am constantly trying to like find people that haven't lived life the way I have. I want to read their books. I want to know I want to know how that impacts, how their characterization is, how their world setup is. I am that weirdo when I hear 2 people having a conversation about something. I'm like trying to like not sit up like a dog with like my tail wagging because I'm like, oh, what's that?
Right.
Fascinated. And so Mexican Gothic is one of my current favorites that I have right now. I have some other ones that I've liked recently, but they are HarperCollins books, and we're not talking about them right now because we respect we don't cross the union lines.
Right.
As an auto working daughter, can't
I know, right? That's big and big up here. Is we don't cross lines. So going back to dialogue for a second, it sounds like you're definitely like a people watcher type of author, which I also can definitely be a people watcher. What tips do you have specifically for dialogue? Like, is it just listening into other people's conversations? Is it reading plays? Like
it's a lot of those things. I think for real life experiences, listening to other conversations when they're happening around you. I have a magnet that says, if you know a writer, you've been plagiarized. And all of my friends know, like, there were certain lines in the first book when they read it, they're like, excuse me. And I was like, what? I don't know what they're talking about. But a lot of it is listening to listening to the current times, like listening to, and it's weird, but like social media is a big thing, like listening to the way people talk, even on like TikTok or YouTube, and like listening to people who present as this is real life, whether it is or not. Because we know things get curated when they get on social
Right.
media.
Right.
Like even with this, like obviously I took notes on some of my answers before I because I wanted to be like prepared. So like I was like, oh, I know some questions like I've been asked before, so like I want to like make some notes. But like it's also listening to like current things like movies, and it's also going back to like time frame. Like in the first book, Rex he's older. And so I was pulling like what phrases were more common in like the 1980s when I was too young to remember them. Like what were some slang terms that like he's definitely used before, or like how is his verbiage going to be harsher than what Cass's is? And I think one of the big standouts between book 1 and book 2 is how we communicate with dialogue that isn't dialogue. So like in the first book, there's a lot of text messaging that goes on because Cass is younger. So she uses more text messages versus Anna, who calls people when there is a problem. Like she's like, why is this happening? What is going on? She's also very direct. So one of the things that I made sure I did not do in my fake dating book is I did not use the miscommunication trope. Yes. And because I didn't want it. And but that was one of those things that with dialogue, once you establish that through line of who that character is and you start building those little quirks, know little things about them. Like know the kind of media that they would consume, because that's going to impact their verbiage and it's going to impact their dialogue. It's going to impact how they speak and the things that they're fascinated by. So that'll give that dialogue more depth when you're talking about something.
I think that is one of the best examples I've ever heard of show don't tell.
Yeah.
That is like the essence of show don't tell.
I try.
Right. And there's also the idea that like only 10%, like the tip of the iceberg goes in the story. Yes. There's so much more that you still need to know and think about your character than what you're going to put in, but it informs the writing so much. Absolutely.
So speaking of good advice, what's bad advice? What's some bad advice you've gotten or advice that you just hate?
So with caveats, I don't like absolutes. I do not like always or never statements. Like don't ever do like take all of the reallys out of your story. Take all of the justs out of yours. Don't use adverbs ever. Like don't like absolutes in writing. Again, there are caveats to that. Obviously we want to write sensitively if we're outside of a lived experience we've had. But I think that's the biggest thing is being told change your writing style completely because this one person in this one seminar said don't ever use ABC. So cut it out of your writing. Now, if you want to edit it down, because believe me, I do that, because I use really a lot when I first draft. Like there's a Marlowe. It's called Marlowe AI, and it will do a rundown of your book, and it will show you repetition words that you've done over and over and over again. And on my first run through of my first book, and again, keep in mind there's 140,000 words in this book. I had used really on the first draft over 400 times. That's still a lot of release.
Right.
We all have our crutch words, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely.
We get that first draft out there and then we go through and pull them out. Yes.
Right.
But also if you have a character who tends to use that word or tends to use one of those words, do not strip it out of that dialogue or that context.
Right.
Every time if you feel like every once in a while, I need this word. So absolutes is my big no advice is don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. Everything in nuance.
That has come up a number of times with our other guests where we stress that you need to know the rules to break them, but that it is okay to break them when you kind of know what you're doing and what your goal is with that story.
Yes.
Yeah. Right. It's all about doing things intentionally, right? Like we are intentionally doing it for a purpose to serve the story and not just willy-nilly
I mean,
up in
maybe
here.
a little willy-nilly.
Little willy-nilly is fine.
Little.
Yeah. Like,
Yeah.
oh, like you said, there's no absolutes, right? So we're never not going to be willy-nilly, right?
Exactly.
um, yeah. Another great thing that I was thinking about as we've had this conversation with you is when you talk about characterization, it reminds me that it's really important to know your character's motivation,
Yes.
right? Because, like you were saying, they're always doing something for a reason. So we have to understand that reason. And I think that can be really key into figuring out who your character is. Like, what is their flaw? What is their motivation? And most importantly, like, what is their goal in the story?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I was talking to somebody in one of the writing groups I'm a part of, and I said their goal doesn't have to be a big lofty goal.
No,
Their
it
goal
can be
is to make dinner. I want to make this dinner. I have burned this pasta every time I have made it.
absolutely.
I am going to make this pasta, and like that's a goal that your character can be going towards. In the second book,
Right.
the running joke is that Anna's goal when you meet her at the beginning of the book is, I want to have a relationship that lasts longer than a couple of dates. And then you realize the reason she's bad at it is because she's bad at it. It is not everything that is like, and then as we go through, it's, I want a relationship with this person versus I want a relationship, which is
right.
a big crux for her. And like we're talking about like backstory that like you don't know. One of the things in the back of my head for Anna has a cat named Jackal. And I thought that would be a little fun, like, because I had a black cat named Jackal when I was younger. And so I wanted her to have this little black cat. And I realized as part of her backstory is that this was a former partner's cat. And they left her the cat because they knew she would be alone because of the way Anna is.
Right.
And essentially the conversation in my head that never gets talked about in the book is that Anna was going on a business trip and they pushed for more. I want to be part of your life. I want to live, I know we're kind of living together. I want to actually be living together. I want us to establish what we are. And Anna says, we're fine the way we are. And they said, if that's really your choice, I'm going to be gone when you get back. And Anna just basically rolled her eyes like, there's no way you're leaving me. I know how valuable I am. And they left, and shocked Pikachu meme later when she walks back
I'm going to leave. What?
Yes.
Right.
That's one of the things that like knowing your characters are like that, like knowing those backstories, like even if it never gets talked about in the book, Anna's very comfortable like moving in and out of people and relationships. And Vinny is like, let's like, I'm still running a business with my ex-girlfriend because I'm totally comfortable with her, and like, why would I just break her off? I know a lot about her. And it's just like confusion.
Right. Yeah. I think there are two types of people in this world, like friends or people who stay friends with their exes, and then other people.
Exactly.
Motivations for sure, or who the ex is.
Yes.
The ex definitely is a big contingency of like whether you do that or not. Yeah. So tell us. Okay. So you recently, I guess, not as recently, but so Love Stories Are is your newest book.
Yes.
I just want to talk a little bit before we end the show about the struggles of writing your second book.
Yeah.
I know Kirsch is in the trenches of it right now, but my first book was a breeze. I rewrote it 3 times, but it was a breeze. My second book, though,
nightmare.
Was like climbing Mount Everest. It was such a nightmare. It was so hard for me.
It's a nightmare.
And I think part of that is because you want to do everything bigger and better and bolder.
Yes.
And you have learned so much from your first book, and you're trying to apply it to your second book, where there's just so much that you're trying to apply that it like feels a little bit like throwing mud at the target and just like wishing for the best.
feel like you're more aware of your own shortcomings than you were at the beginning.
Oh,
Right.
100%.
Right.
100%.
Those rosy glasses are off.
Yes.
Yeah,
It is
100%.
walking uphill through Jello.
Yes.
How I like to describe it is walking
Yeah.
uphill through Jello. So with the second book, I think one of the biggest challenges was I had to remember the timeline, and I had to constantly be
Right.
like double checking and like, because even though they're not codependent, like you could read the second book, not read the first book, and it would be fine. You would miss out on some of the inside jokes, but like it wouldn't ruin the story to not read the first
Mhm.
book. It's a lot more fun if you read the first one, but it's not necessary. But I had to keep timelines, and there was a lot of balancing act, and there was a lot of like
Right.
structure. And I think with the first book too, I had an added structure system that I did not have with the second book. So in the first book, um, there was a pregnancy I was framing the book around, which is like a finite amount of time. And there are
Right.
certain things that happen at certain weeks. And so, like, I had that through line that I could use to kind of keep myself on track.
Right.
And
Right.
second one, I didn't have that. And then I had to make sure that my characters still sounded right. Because before you met them, it's a lot more easy, like, to get away with like a little hint here
Mhm.
and there. Like, maybe that wasn't perfectly their personality, but like I could see them doing this under stress. Or I could see them doing it because of ABCD. In the second book, you have to take all of the stuff, the characterization from the first book, apply it to
Right.
those characters that show up in the second book, balance it so it's not so much,
Mhm.
because
Right.
you don't want to retell the first story in the second story. Like,
No.
like
No.
you want to like acknowledge there is a past, there is another story, but also you don't want to like, you don't want a summary. You don't want your character sitting
Yes.
around at dinner going, "Do you remember last year when this thing happened and all of this other things happened?" And like,
Right. The on the nose dialogue.
right,
Yes. Recapping in an organic way is so difficult so
nice.
that you're not giving too much information, but you are giving the reader the information they need to make sense of why
Yes.
and what. And
Yes.
yeah.
Right.
Or you can
Yeah, because as readers, we all need little reminders of what happens in the other
Mhm.
book, right?
Can't tell you how many times I've read a sequel and I'm like, who are you again? I kind of
Oh,
remember.
yeah. Because we're reading like a ton of other books and then coming back to the series we love, and then it's just like, oh, who were you?
Someone's like, have
Like,
you read this book? You're like, yeah, I read it. I loved it. And they're like, what's it about? And you're like,
I don't know.
right, that was 5 books ago. Like, you should have
I
asked
like
me last, not month, right?
That was one of the reasons I wanted to get the second book out a year later. Is that I wanted, there's, okay, my mother and I have gone back and forth on this, whether or not this is an actual cliffhanger or not at the end of the first book. I maintain that that could have been an unanswered question. That is something that the reader could have read. They knew what it meant, opened the door for a second book, but wasn't necessary. You could have lived without knowing the ins and outs of what happened after said thing. My mother, on the other hand, yelled at me for like an upteen amount of time because she considered it a cliffhanger and she had to know what the thing was.
Right.
So
right.
hilariously, going back to like things that struggle in the second book, so like I made sure I spelled out what happened and what the ins and outs were. And then when I was editing on my first line, I realized that I'd done it like multiple times.
Right.
So I cut them all out, except I cut all of them out. And my alpha reader goes, "Do I get to know what this is?" And I'm like, "What?" She's like, "Do I get to know?" And I was like, "No, I had to edit it. Oh, I edited all of them out."
Right. Right.
I needed them all out. Gonna like set this back in there.
Right. 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 We got to keep one explanation in there. Yeah, I know I've done that where I'm just like with turns of phrases that I'm like, oh, this is a really good turn of phrase, and then I go back in editing and I'm like, oh, I loved it so much because I already used it once. So yeah, sometimes we do gems like that where we're
For
like,
that, I'm
okay,
trying to
yeah.
find beta readers for my second book who have not read the first book so that they won't come in with any foreknowledge, so they can pick up whether or not they've already been filled in on something.
I did that with the second book. I had 2 of my alpha readers had read Love Is and 2 of them hadn't. when they read
Okay.
love stories, and it was super, super helpful. It was also hilarious to see like the difference in like how they reacted to Matt, versus knowing his
Right.
personality versus not knowing his
Yeah.
personality.
Right.
Someone
Right.
else just like, he's kind of a jerk. I was like, oh, he gets better. Even in the second book, he's kind of mouthy.
Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
see his thoughts, he's a little softer than he seems.
Right. 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 He's just like a shot. Like it goes down smooth after. We promise. Right.
Well, he's a little aggressive. I think the best line. So the TikTok audio, if you've ever heard the oh my god, oh my god, oh my god, oh my god from Bob,
Right.
that is Matt's the entire first book. Like the whole thing is just this constant run of stress. But he's mouthy, and he's always been aggressive. That's always kind of been part of his personality. And is he cruel? No, absolutely not. He's a nicer guy than he thinks he is.
Oh yeah.
But he's got a temper, and it loses it fast, and he gets growly and snarly, and it's so funny because the characters that know him just are kind of like, whatever.
Right.
And Anna's like,
Just another Tuesday. Right. Yeah.
is he okay? is he all right?
Right. Right. Right.
It's just the way it is.
Yeah. All right. So, do you have plans on doing any other books, or is it just a duology for that series?
This series is a duology. It does have a companion cookbook. Because one of the jokes in the books is Cass has a Graham. She calls her grandmother Graham, who was a roadie for a rock band back in the day before Cass's dad was born. And so she has rated R recipes. So these are normal recipes that have inappropriate titles. So like curl your toes, French toast, and just kind of go on down through that path. The cookbook's available on Amazon, on Kindle, as just, it's a little like cheap little, it's not a ton of recipes. I've tested them all, or someone else has done it for me. I don't cook a whole bunch, but I had somebody who actually knows what they're doing. Cook it for me. But it's just, and it's got little snippet like quote lines from like what the characters within the recipes, and it's a lot of fun. They're all good recipes though. There's some drinks in there, regular dishes, as a companion. But yeah, that one's gonna be a duet, and then I'm just working on got like 3 other books that are in the works right now.
Oh yeah, I was gonna say, what's next for you? You got 3 books
That's
coming.
how we go.
Yeah.
I have 3 I'm working on. I'm working on a darker piece that is going to take me probably about 2 years at minimum. There's a lot more world building in that one. That one is going to be a paranormal, dark, but still contemporary setting. But we've got a lot of craziness. That one's going to be like, I'm going to put that one outside of my Sweet Tales with Spice imprint, because that's going to be a little too dark. I have a second chance romance that I just started outlining out for, that I'm super excited about. And then I have the current whip that I am focused on, is kind of a heist book, which is super fun, except realized how unreliable my narrator needs to be. So I write in third person is my comfort zone. This one is in first person, and I hate it. But it needs to be that unreliable, so it needs to be
right.
But it is not my favorite, and I'm fighting it every tooth and nail. And that one's going to have plus size representation. As Lolan, our grifter, is a plus size woman, and that one's going to kind of have Leverage vibes. If you've ever seen Leverage, it's going to have kind of like that kind of vibe to it. But
nice,
it's exciting.
And then where can we find you online?
Yeah, absolutely. So Sweet Tales with Spice is my website. It is super easy to find me that way. Tales like telling a story, not like a tale. And then my books are available on Amazon. And you can either the Kindle version, they're available on KU. So if you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read them for free. Or you can order books, or if you really, really want to, you can check out my website. There's a contact information if you want to order signed copies. It's like a secret. So like if anybody wants to order signed copies, you can do that too. So
yeah, I love a signed copy of books. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us.
Having me.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. You guys are awesome.
Oh, thanks. And thanks to the readers for listening. Join us next time when we'll be welcoming our next guest. And remember, there's always more than one way up a mountain. To
Absolutely.
be on our show, you can find us on social media at The Tell Not Show or email us at thetellnotshow at gmail.com.
Thank you
Thank
so
you
much,
very much.
Katharine.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thanks again for listening. If you enjoyed the show, consider subscribing and liking. We appreciate all the support. Julia J.K. Allen is an author, editor, and coach and can be found at hijinksrudder.com.
Kirsha Fox is an author, avid reader, gamer, and mother to four, and you can find her at kirshafox.com. Thanks and see you next time.